video of Charlie Kirk addressing these kinds of issues in some of his events, and he specifically and explicitly stated, I'm not going to be associated with Jew hatred. He would face these questions about anti-Jewish conspiracy theories, and he was clear every single time. And so I think what Ben is responding to and talking about are these
So why is Tucker on stage at Turning Points USA now?
Look, he's had a long-standing relationship with the organization. I don't speak for them, but all I can tell you is that what Charlie Kirk stood for was that he said, I'm not going to be associated with Jew hatred, period. And when he talks about Nick Fuentes and Candace and others trafficking in these conspiracy theories, I think Ben is doing it in the spirit of Charlie, who was very clear on this matter.
Well, it does seem to me an all eyes on J.D. Vance situation and Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, frankly. If the elected leaders, the self-proclaimed, leaders of the MAGA movement are willing to tolerate the platforming of a avowed Hitler apologist in Nick Fuentes, I mean, that seems to me like where the pressure should be. I certainly agree with Scott that Ben Shapiro and others who are calling out the anti-Semitism, the conspiracy theories of the likes of Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, frankly, Megyn Kelly as well. I think that is an important and good thing for them to be doing. But ultimately, this flows up to, what are the elected leaders of the MAGA movement willing to tolerate? And J.D. Vance, to me, he really failed this moral moment. He failed in this moral moment. He had the opportunity to say, I disavow this. He has said that in the past, by the way. He has said he disavows Nick Fuentes. This was clearly a stage where that was called for, and he did not do it. And that, I think, he is going to have to continue to answer for.
Well, and to this side of the table, if we're focusing in on J.D. Vance, it is worth noting that he gave another interview around this speech. Now, he did not say this from the stage, but this is what he said to Unheard, this outlet. Quote, let me be clear. Anyone who attacks my wife, whether their name is Jen Psaki, she's, of course, the former Biden press secretary, now MS Now host, or Nick Fuentes, can eat SHIT. That is my official policy as the vice president of the United States. So he's willing to say that in this forum, but not on that stage.
Yeah.
To me, this is a really interesting view into the people that are following in Trump's wake. So many of them have defined themselves by jettisoning whatever policies and beliefs they had before and just glomming onto what Trump says. Now Trump's off the stage and they have to think for themselves again. You're in a position where J.D. Vance is in this spot and has really no background to draw on. How did he get to where he is? Just by agreeing with Trump. Trump's gone. All he can do is sort of invoke Donald Trump's name but not make any of his own decisions. It shows you how thin the bench is and how unprepared they are for a moment without Trump.
What I find fascinating is that the idea of a civil war in any political movement isn't anything new, particularly as you approach midterms halfway through a presidential administration. That's usually the party that's out of power. And I think part of what's driving this is the singularity of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. And this was sort of inevitable, this moment. Now it's painful to watch that in part it deals with anti-Semitism and whether people are willing to push it aside. But at its core, it's sort of the natural political fight.
I think it's also worth considering that for the Tucker Carlsons, the Megyn Kellys of the world, they are trying to build followers. They are trying to make money. And so there is a divergence of interests in terms of, conflict cells, and whether the Megyn Kellys and Tucker Carlsons of the world, whether, again, MAGA and the people who are running for office, asking to represent the American people, are willing to tolerate having these people who are fundamentally out to, to make money, often to shock, often to create conflict. Are they going to be allowed to speak for the MAGA movement? I think that the elected officials who want to represent Americans across the country need to say with a clear voice, we don't tolerate this. This is not the kind of language that we're going to tolerate in our party.
I don't disagree with you. I think ultimately it'll be up to the nominee of the party, most likely J.D. Vance, to basically say who's in my group and who's out, and to separate himself from people who are trafficking in hate and conspiracy theories. I would just draw you back to the straw poll results from there was thousands upon thousands of people clearly stood with Israel, clearly believe radical Islam is the top issue facing the United States. So the debate happening on the stage was one thing. There really wasn't that much of a debate in the crowd. I think some of the Civil War talk is a bit of a mirage when you actually look at the results of the polling among the people in the stands.
Well, do you think that saying radical Islam is the greatest threat automatically means support for Israel? Because
the ones fighting
there is this white Christian nationalism situation also that is where some of this anti-Semitism comes out of.
Well, look, Tucker was on the stage attacking Republicans who were up there saying, we have to worry about radical Islam. He was kind of defending it up there. That wasn't where the crowd was at all. And so I think some of the people who are dabbling in some of these things that I think are wrong, they don't have as much support among the people in that crowd as they think they do. Now, I think you might be right that they see benefit to it in growing an online audience. But in that arena, I think that arena is much more where Charlie was, much more where Ben is than where some of these conspiracy provocateurs are.
Quick. Because really interesting point that Kristen Soltis Anderson just made in the chat, this idea of whether this very fight is mostly of interest to conservative voters or if median voters actually care about it or there's a particular interest to it. It would seem like this is a family feud happening that one segment of the population really cares about, but I'd be curious to hear how.
Well, I think that there's also, I think it's an important big picture question about whether the base of one of the major parties in our country is going to tolerate anti-Semitism coming from its stages, regardless of what breaks through.
To be fair, if you're going to make that comment, we have once invoked the Democratic Party or what's going on the left right now, and if you're talking about anti-Semitism,
we can absolutely.
I mean,
we are not afraid to talk about that
compared
from
to them.
the left either.
But
Scott, and you know that about me and this show.
I know. I'm just saying.
We are not afraid of doing that.
No, I'm just saying.
No, but if the names were changed and it were, pick the MoveOn.org conference, and there was still the same sort of debate happening over anti-Semitism, we all ought to be calling it out, and I think we're in agreement about that.
Yeah, and I think honestly Scott has called it out.
No, I'm not saying I did not say
anybody who apologizes for Hitler, we should call out. I'm willing to make that
I think we're in agreement. There's anti-Semitism on all sides, and it's really bad, and we want to stamp it out of American political debates. Full stop.
Yes, full stop. All right, coming up next here in the arena, we are going to talk with Republican Congressman Mike Lawler about all of this and more. He is here live this hour. Plus, the story about the story, new details on why the new head of CBS abruptly pulled a planned 60 Minutes report on a part of the president's deportation policy. But first, the Justice Department could release more Epstein files really at any minute, as some in Congress float potential consequences for the Attorney General after all of the documents were not released by Friday's deadline.
I believe impeachment should be on the table as well. What she has done is impeachable, but of course a much larger political hurdle to have to overcome.
Welcome to Times Square. Anderson looks like a soldier, and I'm clutching my pearl.
New Year's Eve Live with Anderson and Andy starts at 8 on CNN and watch on the CNN app.
And a thief, nothing like it.
All I need is discipline and focus.
It's the NFL. We're playing against the best.
Let's go!
For the perfect present, the perfect place is your local Ace. This Christmas, order online and we'll have it ready for pickup in 15 minutes. Around the block, what you need in stock, with service so good it's guaranteed.
Ace is the place with the helpful hardware, folks.
Worried about your brain health? Cerefolin Brain Wellness has a dual-action formula that slows cognitive decline while improving memory, focus, and concentration.